boy at the forge. In the northern marches of the Iron Peaks, where the mountains stood stern and grey beneath the cold winds, there was in former days a fortress town called Stonegate. It was not counted among the great mansions of the dwarves, nor did kings sit there upon thrones of gold. Yet it was strong in its fashion, and dear to those who dwelt within it. For Stonegate was set upon the edge of the realm, watching the roads that came down from the north. Many roads met beneath its walls. Traders passed through its gates, messengers found shelter in its halls, and soldiers of the greater kingdom kept watch from its towers. It was a place of stone and iron, of smoke, labour, and long duty. Its folk were not rich, but they were proud, and though songs were seldom made of such towns, the safety of greater halls often rested upon them. Near the eastern gate, where the sound of marching feet was often heard, and where the wind carried the smell of pine and snow, stood the forge of Jorik the Smith. Jorik was no lord, nor of any royal house. He was a common dwarf, broad of hand and quiet of speech, but his work was trusted. The guards of Stonegate brought him their broken buckles, their axe heads, their mail, and their shields. He asked no praise for his labour, and gave none cheaply. His son was named Jofar. From his earliest years, Jofar worked beside him. He carried coal turned iron, swept the floor, and watched the colour of heated steel as other children watched the sky. Jorik taught him the craft of the forge, but he taught him more than craft. For Jorik held that iron was not the only thing shaped by fire. "If you only do what you can," he would say, "you will never become more than you are now." These words Jofar heard often, and at first he understood them only as the hard teaching of a stern father. When the hammer grew heavy in his hands, when the heat of the forge bit at his face, and when his arms shook from labour, Jorik did not always spare him. He was not cruel, but he believed comfort made poor iron and poorer dwarves. "The world has evil enough in it," Jorik would say. "A good dwarf must learn to stand between that evil and those who cannot stand alone." So Jofar grew under pressure. He became tall for a dwarf, though not beyond the measure of his kind, and strong in the shoulders. His hair was dark brown and worn long in his youth, and only a stubble of beard had begun to show upon his face in the final weeks of his 17th year. His eyes were grey, ash-grey, and those who later knew him said that even then they could grow hard enough to make a guilty dwarf look away. It was in those final weeks before his 18th year that the first grief of Jofar came upon him. For the orcs of the north, long driven into hidden places, gathered in secret and descended upon Stonegate. At first they came as raiders, or so the watch believed. But before dawn their full strength was seen. They fell upon the eastern gate with ladders, hooks, and black iron, and the horns of Stonegate sounded through the streets. The fighting was bitter. The guards held the wall as long as they could, and many brave dwarves fell upon the stones. Yet Stonegate was a fortress of the frontier, not a deep city of the old days, and the enemy had chosen their hour well. Before the sun stood high above the peaks, the eastern gate was broken. Then fire and battle entered Stonegate. Jorik's forge stood not far from the gate, and soon the war came to its very door. Seeing that the lower streets were failing, Jorik placed into Jofar's hands an axe they had restored together only days before. It was no ancient weapon of kings, nor did any song yet belong to it. It was a good axe, repaired by father and son, fitted once more for war. "Go," said Jorik. "Help the elders to the inner hall." Jofar did not wish to leave him, but Jorik gave him the look of a father whose command would not be argued with. So Jofar went, and with the axe in hand he helped lead the old and the wounded from the lower streets. But when he returned, the gate had fully fallen. Smoke filled the road. The cries of dwarves and orcs rang beneath the stone walls. There before the forge, Jofar saw his father struck down. The orc who had done it still stood above him. Then the first wrath of Jofar was kindled. He did not cry out. He did not call for aid. He came upon the orc with the axe of his father's forge and struck him down with a single blow. Those who saw it remembered the sound of it, for the axe bit deep, and the orc fell where it stood. But Jofar couldn't kneel beside Jorik. More enemies were coming. The battle had not passed, so he stood above his father, axe in hand, facing the street and the smoke, ready for whatever came next. Only once did he glance down. Jorik looked up at him and smiled. No last words passed between them. No blessing was spoken. No farewell was given. The war returned too swiftly. Orcs came again, and Jofar turned back to the fight. In that moment, the guards of Stonegate, who had fallen back from the lower streets, beheld a sight that would be remembered long after their own names were forgotten. A young dwarf standing before the forge, his father at his feet, smoke behind him, axe in hand, and death in his eyes. Then the reinforcements from the inner barracks arrived. The counterattack began. The dwarves of Stonegate, heartened and angered, drove the orcs back through the broken gate and out upon the road beyond the walls. When the battle ended, Stonegate still stood, but Jorik the Smith was dead. Some say Jofar did not speak for a long while after he learned it. Others say he returned to the forge that same evening and began putting out the fires with his own hands. Both tales may be true, for grief and duty were ever mingled in him from that day onward. Jofar inherited the forge before he came fully into manhood. Many thought it would fail. He was young, his father was gone, and Stonegate itself had wounds that would not quickly heal. Yet the forge did not fail. Through the years that followed, Jofar labored without complaint. He repaired the armor of the guards, often for less than was owed. He helped the widows of fallen soldiers when he could. He attended the memorials of the siege and did not forget the names of those who had died near the eastern gate. When craftsmen quarreled, he was often asked to speak between them. When younger dwarves lacked work, he gave them tasks. In time, as he neared his 22nd year, he took apprentices of his own, and the forge once more became a place of steady fire. It also became a place where guards liked to gather. Some came for repairs, some came because they had known Jorik. Some came because Jofar was easy to speak with, though not always easy to impress. He listened more than he boasted, and when he did speak, his words tended to have weight. It was thus that Captain Darek first came to know him. Darek was an old captain of Stonegate, stern but fair, and grey had entered his beard long before Jofar took up the guard's shield. He had served through many winters, and had seen enough young dwarves mistake courage for noise. His men respected him. They did not scatter when he approached. They straightened. One day Darek came to Jorik's old forge and found several guards standing near the doorway, speaking with the young smith. Their voices quieted when he entered. "Captain," said one, bowing his head. Darek looked from one guard to another, and then to Jofar. "Is the gate now kept from this forge?" he asked. There were small smiles, but no mockery. Darek's men knew his manner. "No, sir," one guard answered. "Then why are my guards here in daylight?" "Repairs, sir," said another. Darek glanced at the swords and buckles already mended upon the bench. "Repairs do not usually require 4 tongues." At that, even Jofar smiled faintly. Darek's eyes settled on him. "And who are you?" Before Jofar answered, one of the older guards spoke. "This is Jofar, son of Jorik the Smith." Darek was silent a moment. "Jorik's boy?" "Aye, sir." Another guard added more softly. "They won from the siege." Darek's gaze sharpened. "The boy at the forge?" "Yes, sir," said the guard. "The one who stood when the lower street was lost." Darek looked back at his men with a dry expression. "When it was lost, was it?" The guard cleared his throat. "When it seemed lost, sir." For the first time, Darek smiled. After that day, Darek did not forget Jofar. He came more often to the forge, sometimes with work, sometimes with questions, and sometimes with no clear purpose that Jofar could see. He watched how Jofar dealt with apprentices, how he spoke to guards, how he carried the memory of his father without making a display of sorrow. Darek saw no hunger for glory in him. That interested him more than glory would have. Within 2 months, the old captain had made his decision. "You have learned how to make axes," Darek said one evening while the fires of the forge burned low. Jofar looked up from the anvil. Darek continued, "Now learn how to master one." So Jofar entered the Guard of Stonegate in his 22nd year. For 3 years, he trained beneath Darek. He learned shield work, patrol routes, formations, the weight of armor in rain, the patience required upon a cold wall, and the difference between bravery and command. Darek did not praise him often. When Jofar did well, he was given harder work. When he erred, Darek corrected him sharply and without cruelty. In those years, Jofar remained a smith, as well as a guardsman. His apprentices kept the forge when he was away, and often he returned from patrol to labor again beside the fire. Thus he learned what few captains learn early, that war is not won only with courage, but with supply, repair, discipline, trust, and tired hands that do their work when no one is singing of them. His first true command came in Ashwood. Ashwood lay south of Stonegate, beneath the lower slopes of the Iron Peaks. In elder days it had been burned in battle, and though the forest had grown again, it was never as it had been before. Birch trees stood pale among the older pines, and in autumn their yellow leaves covered the ground until the whole wood seemed touched by ash and gold. It was in the autumn of Jofar's 25th year that Darek led a company of young guards through Ashwood after a day of training near the lake beyond the trees. They were tired but in good spirits. Some spoke of food waiting in Stonegate. Others joked quietly as dwarves do when work is done and danger seems far away. Then an arrow struck Darek. It came from the trees without warning. The old captain staggered and fell to one knee. A second arrow flew. Then cries rose from the wood, harsh and cruel, and orc scouts poured from among the birches. The company was young. Few had seen true battle. Some reached for shields, some froze. Some looked to Darek, but Darek had fallen, and no order came. Then Jofar's voice rang out across the road. "Shields!" The word cut through the panic. Again he shouted louder. "Shields to me!" The dwarves turned. Some obeyed at once, others because the first had obeyed. Jofar took Darek's shield, planted himself upon the forest road, and raised his axe. "Stand your ground, dwarves!" he roared. "Let these filth learn what dwarven might looks like." There are many songs that later change those words, making them grander or more polished, but the oldest account keeps them plain, and therefore they are believed. The dwarves formed around him. Jofar saw that the road narrowed between birch and stone, and he used it. He set shields across the path, placed spears behind them, and ordered the wounded dragged to the rear. The orcs had thought to scatter recruits. Instead, they struck a wall. Again and again they came, and again they were thrown back. Jofar did not fight as one seeking renown. He fought as one holding a door. His axe rose and fell, but his greater strength was in his voice. When a dwarf faltered, he called him by name. When the line bent, he drove it straight. When fear returned, he crushed it beneath command. By the time help arrived from Stonegate, the ambush had failed. Captain Darek still breathed, though faintly, and the road through Ashwood was strewn with orc dead. Many dwarves had wounds that day, and some did not return. Yet the company had not broken. Afterward, when the tale spread through Stonegate, some spoke of Jofar's strength, others spoke of his courage, but the wiser dwarves spoke of something greater. For at 17 he had stood his ground. At 25 others stood because of him. And from that day the name of Jofar, son of Jorik, began to pass beyond the forge, beyond the gate, and beyond the walls of the small fortress where he had been born. The bear had not yet been named, but those who had eyes to see knew that he had begun to wake. The shield captain of Stonegate. After the ambush in Ashwood, the company returned to Stonegate beneath a sky of low cloud and fading light. The wounded were borne upon rough litters, and those who could still walk did so in silence. For victory had been won, yet it was not the manner of victory that fills halls with singing. Too many had seen death near at hand. Too many had heard the arrows come from the trees. And Captain Darek, who had led them out in the morning, was brought home pale and still, with the arrow wound bound beneath his mail. For many days it was said that he would die, but Darek did not die. The old captain had weathered too many winters to surrender easily, and his spirit remained hard, even when his body had been weakened. Yet the wound left its mark. He could no longer march long roads without pain. His breath grew short in cold weather, and there were days when his sword arm stiffened, though he hid it as best he could from the younger guards. Still he returned to duty. Such was Darek. He stood upon the walls when he could. He inspected watches. He questioned scouts. He corrected young guards with the same hard tongue as before. Yet those who knew him well saw the truth. The captain's mind remained keen, but the long labor of the field was passing from him. It was in those days that Jofar began to stand more often at his side. At first it was not by title. No horn was sounded, no order proclaimed. Darek would send him to inspect the lower road, or to speak with the armorers, or to question a patrol that had returned late from the north. He asked Jofar what he saw, and when Jofar answered too quickly, Darek made him answer again. "Look once, and you will see what any fool sees," Darek told him. "Look twice, and you may see what the fool missed." Thus Jofar learned not only the use of shield and axe, but the weight of command. He learned that a missing goat might mean hunger, theft, or a scout testing the edge of a settlement. He learned that a road too quiet could speak louder than one filled with noise. He learned that fear spreads faster than fire, and that a captain must master his own face before he can stay the hearts of others. The threat from the north grew. At first it came in small signs, black-feathered arrows found near the old roads, hoof prints where no riders had passed, fire seen far off in the night and gone by morning. Merchants came later than expected, and spoke of shapes moving beyond the trees. Twice, guards on the wall heard horns in the dark, low and far away, though no army was seen. There were some in Stonegate who said these were only scouts, and scouts had always troubled the frontier. Others were less certain. Darak was among them. "A fool waits for the army," he said to Jofar one evening, as they stood upon the eastern wall. "A captain sees the shadow before the army comes." These words Jofar remembered. In his 27th year, when the northern signs had become too many to ignore, Darak went before the captains of Stonegate and before Lord Dorin Greyshield, who ruled the fortress town in those days. Dorin was a grave lord, cautious but fair. He had ruled through hard years and had learned to mistrust the promise of easy victories. He was not loved as a merry lord is loved, but he was respected, and under him Stonegate had endured. Yet he bore sorrow of his own, and sorrow had made him careful. The captains were gathered in the lower hall of command, where the maps of the northern roads were kept. There stood Harn also, an older captain of stern manner and cold judgment. He had seen many young dwarves win praise and then lose sense beneath the weight of it. He did not dislike Jofar, but he trusted neither youth nor sudden fame. Darak spoke first. "My lord," he said, "Stonegate needs a captain who can take the field. I can still advise, and I can still command from these walls when need is upon us. But the roads grow darker, and I cannot march them as I once did." Dorin looked long upon him. "You have served Stonegate longer than many in this hall have worn mail," he said. "No one here doubts you, Darak." "Then hear me when I name the dwarf who should take my place in the field." The hall grew still. "Jofar, son of Jorik." Some of the captains shifted. Harn's brow hardened. "He is young," said one. "He was a smith 5 years ago," said another. Harn spoke more plainly. "Courage is not command. One day in Ashwood does not make a captain of Stonegate." Darak turned to him. "No," he said, "but it reveals one." There was silence, but not agreement. Doran sat with his hands folded before him, his face unreadable. "You ask much," said the Lord at last. "Jofar is respected, that I know. But respect among gods is not the same as command over them, and the north is not a training ground." Then Darak's patience, which had been held like a drawn bow, at last broke. He struck the butt of his axe upon the stone floor, and the sound rang through the hall. "Jofar!" The doors were opened. Jofar entered. He came not in bright armor, nor with lordly ornament. He wore the practical gear of Stonegate's guard, mail leather, iron plates, fitted and strengthened by his own hand, and a short dark cloak, clasped at the shoulder. He walked with the strength of one who knew neither haste nor fear, and stood beside Darak, not behind him. For the first time Lord Dorin Greyshield looked closely upon the young dwarf of whom so much had been spoken. Darak set his gaze upon the captains. "You say he is young," he said. "So was he when he stood at the forge, yet grown dwarves found courage from him." No one answered. "I have seen loud dwarves," Darak continued. "I have seen strong dwarves, and old dwarves, and dwarves who count years as though years alone ever held a shield wall. But when fear came upon my company in Ashwood, it was this dwarf who gave them back their courage. If Stonegate must face the north again, then I would rather place its shield in the hands of one who has already held the line." Harn looked at Jofar. "And what says the smith's son?" he asked. Jofar did not answer at once. He looked from Harn to Dorin, and then to Darak. "I do not seek Darak's place," he said. "But if Stonegate has need of me, I will stand where I am placed." Dorin watched him a while longer. Then he rose. "So be it," he said. "Jofar, son of Jorik, by the word of Captain Darak and by the need of Stonegate, you are named Shield Captain of the Eastern Guard. You will answer to this hall, and to me. You will hold the roads, watch the north, and keep the people beyond the walls as far as strength and wisdom allow." Then, after a pause, Dorin added, "See that strength does not outrun wisdom." Thus Jofar became Shield Captain of Stonegate. In the weeks that followed, he did not rest upon the honor. He studied the roads north of the fortress and the paths through Ashwood. He questioned merchants, hunters, woodcutters, and guards. He listened to old tales of raids and looked upon old maps until the marks of them were fixed in his mind. He remembered Ashwood. There the orcs had chosen the place and hour. There they'd struck first. There Darak had fallen before he could give command. Jofar did not forget that lesson. "Good leaders learn from their own mistakes," Darak once told him. "Great leaders learn from the mistakes of others." Jofar took those words to heart. So when reports came that orc scouts had again been seen near Ashwood, he did not call at once for a pursuit. Instead, he prepared a trap. A false caravan was made ready, with pack animals, covered loads, and a small vessel escort. To any hidden watcher it would seem a tempting prize, slow, lightly guarded, and bound for the lower road through Ashwood. But in the woods ahead and to either side, Jofar placed 30 dwarves beneath the pale birches and among the low stones. Farther north, where the road narrowed into a mountain pass, 15 more waited in silence. Before the caravan moved, Jofar spoke quietly to those nearest him. "Do not close the trap too soon," he said. "Let some run. Fear runs faster than any messenger." So the caravan entered Ashwood. The day was grey, and the autumn leaves lay thick upon the ground. The birches stood pale and still, their yellow crowns shivering in the wind. For a long while, nothing moved. Then, as the road bent near a fallen trunk, the orcs struck. They came with the confidence of hunters, but they found instead that they had been hunted. At Jofar's signal, dwarves rose from behind stone and tree. Shields locked, axes flashed. The road that had swallowed Darak's company 2 years before now closed like a fist around the enemy. Some orcs fell where they stood, others fled north, as Jofar had intended. At the mountain pass, the 15 rose. The way closed before the fleeing scouts, and the way behind them thundered with dwarven pursuit. There the orcs broke fully. One was taken alive. They brought him before Jofar among the rocks, bound but snarling. He spoke in the harsh tongue of his kind, and one among the dwarves who knew enough of it translated. The orc boasted of the strength of the north. He said the lands of the dwarves would fall. He said Stonegate would burn again, and that the mothers of dwarves would hide beneath the stones. Some of the younger guards grew uneasy at his words, for threats are not powerless when spoken by one who has seen the enemy's camp. But Jofar did not falter. He drew the axe of Jorik's forge. At the sight of it, or perhaps at the sight of the dwarf who bore it, the orc's eyes changed. His hatred remained, but fear rose beneath it. Jofar asked where the camp lay. The orc gave only more threats. That is when Jofar's axe fell. There was no knowledge in him, said Jofar. Only fear wearing the mask of threat. The company did not cheer. Jofar gave no sign that he expected it. He ordered the wounded and weary to return towards Stonegate, and with them he sent word of what had passed. Then he reorganized those who had remained and waited for his scouts. Before night deepened, they returned. The camp had been found. 15 orcs remained there, making ready to depart northward. If they reached their masters, word of Stonegate's movements would go with them. Jofar took 30 dwarves and went on. He left 5 to block the road that led from the camp into the deeper woods. The rest moved under cover of darkness until they saw the firelight through the trees. The orcs were caught in an ill hour, some packing, some eating, some arguing in the smoke of their own fires. They had sent hunters to Ashwood and did not expect the hunters to be followed home. Jofar gave the signal. The attack was swift. The dwarves came from the dark like stone-given wrath. Before the orcs could form, the camp was broken. 2 fled toward the road, crying warning into the night. But within moments there came the sound of axes from the way beyond, and the cries were ended. When the fighting was done, Jofar did not linger in triumph. The forest was enemy country, and night was upon them. He ordered the camp searched quickly. Every scrap, every mark, every token, every crude drawing and sign was gathered. "We will read it behind stone," he said. Then the camp was destroyed. By the time Jofar returned to Stonegate, the first wounded had already reached the fortress and told what they had seen. Therefore many were waiting near the gate when he came in. Guards called out to him. Some struck their shields in greeting, others simply smiled, with the relief of seeing the company return. Darak was there also. He stood with the help of his axe, pale but proud, and though he said little, his eyes said enough. Yet not all faces were joyful. At the entrance to the main hall stood Lord Dorin Greyshield. He did not call across the court. He did not praise Jofar before the people. He merely raised one hand and beckoned him inside, and Jofar followed. Dorin led him first to the map chamber, where candles burned low over the roads of the north. For a while, he said nothing. Then he placed a finger upon Ashwood. "You have done a bold thing," said Dorin. "It was needful," said Jofar. "Many bold things are needful," Dorin answered. "That does not make them without cost." Jofar was silent. "You speak of hunting scouts as though the matter ends when their bodies fall," said Dorin. "But enemies remember. Blood answers blood. A struck horn may wake a host." "They were already watching our roads," Jofar said. "So they were," said Dorin. "And yet a lord must ask not only what the enemy does, but what he will do next." He turned away from the map. "Here," he said. "Follow me." Dorin led him from the chamber and down a narrow passage cut into the old stone of Stonegate. They came at last to the memorial hall, where names of the fallen were carved upon dark slabs beneath the light of low lamps. Some names were ancient, worn soft by time. Others were newer, their edges still sharp beneath the chisel. Dorin stopped before 2 stones set side by side. Upon each was carved the symbol of a tree, its its branches bent above the names as though sheltering it. Hilda, and Frida. For a long while Dorin said nothing. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "It was not Ashwood then," he said. "It was Elderwood. My wife and mother were killed there by scouts." Jofar looked at the stones. "The captains rode after them," Dorin continued. "They found the enemy. They won the field, or so the records say. But the battle burned the wood, and before that year was done, many more names were carved into this hall." He looked at Jofar then. "I do not tell you this to shame you, nor to say that you were wrong to strike. But remember this: a captain thinks first of the enemy before him. A lord must think of the homes behind him." Those words sank deep into Jofar, though he did not yet know how deep. He bowed his head. "I will remember." "See that you do," said Dorin. When Jofar left the memorial hall, he found Darak waiting in the outer passage. The old captain's face was grave. "The things from the camp have been read," Darak said. Jofar looked up. Darak handed him a folded piece of rough hide, marked in black. "They had our roads," he said. "Patrol paths, caravan routes, farms beyond the lower fields, woodcutters' paths, small holdings, places where guards are few." Jofar took the hide and studied it. His face hardened. "They were not wandering." "No," said Darak. "They were eyes." "Whose?" Darak shook his head. "That is not yet known, but they were not alone in purpose." Thus Dorin's lesson and Darak's news met within him. Action had consequences, but inaction had consequences also. The danger had not been born from Jofar's hunt. It had already been walking towards Stonegate through the trees. Later that night Jofar went upon the wall. The air was cold, and the iron peak stood black against the stars. Below, the fields lay quiet. Beyond them, Ashwood was a darker shadow beneath the mountains. Jofar walked the line as captains do, speaking softly to guards, asking after posts, looking to the hinges of gates and the set of watchfires. Near the eastern tower, a guard raised a hand. "Captain!" Jofar stopped. "What is it?" The guard pointed beyond the lower field, toward the edge of the trees. "There!" At first, Jofar saw nothing. Then, far beyond the torchlight, something moved among the trunks, a shape, still and dark. It did not charge. It didn't flee at once. It watched. Then it was gone. Jofar stood long upon the wall, looking into the night. And it is said that from that hour the North began to know there was a new captain in Stonegate. Not one who waited only behind the walls, not one who counted safety by the closing of gates. Stonegate had begun to hunt back. And far away in the dark places beyond Ashwood, the name of Jofar was first spoken with unease. "The price of the hunt." In the days after the breaking of the scout camp, no peace truly returned to Stonegate. The gates were shut earlier than before and opened later. The watches were doubled upon the eastern wall, and men who had once laughed by the braziers now stood long in silence, peering northward over Ashwood and the dark shoulders of the iron peaks. No caravan passed beneath the gate unmarked, no hunter returned without question, and no smoke upon the far ridges was judged a small thing. For the tokens and rough writings taken from the Orc camp had been laid before Lord Dorin Greyshield and the captains. And though much of their meaning was hidden, enough was plain to trouble the stoutest heart. Dorin sent riders to the greater kingdom, bidding them ride with all haste through the mountain roads. "Tell the high halls," he said, "that the north stirs, and that Stonegate has found more than wandering beasts beneath the trees." Yet he did not suffer fear to rule his hall. He ordered stores counted, gates inspected, arrows fletched, roads watched, and word carried to the settlements that lay beneath Stonegate's shield. In this he showed the manner of his lordship, cautious, grave, and slow to boast, but not slow to bear the burden that was his. Jofar, son of Jorik, was then in his 28th year. Young still by the reckoning of dwarves, yet already old in sorrow, he moved between wall and road, armory and stable, map chamber and outer gate. The victory in Ashwood had not made him light of heart. Rather, it had deepened his watchfulness. He had seen that the enemy was not merely hungry for blood, but searching, learning, feeling along the borders like a hand in darkness. Darek saw this in him and was silent. Harn saw it also, and though the old captain still wore doubt upon his brow, he no longer spoke to Jofar as to a reckless youth. The answer of the north came sooner than many had feared. The first warning was smoke above Stonefell. Stonefell was a small settlement of the lower lands, built where the open fields drew near to the pale birches of Ashwood. There dwelt miners when work called them outward, carters, herdsmen, smiths of lesser forges, and families who trusted that the shield of Stonegate stretched beyond its walls. The place was not strong, yet it was loved by those who had built it with their own hands. Among the rough orders and tokens taken from the scout camp were signs that pointed towards Stonefell. The writings were crude and uncertain, yet they spoke of a raid upon the settlement, and gave account that seemed to speak of a host not less than 80, and perhaps as many as 120 orcs. Some among the captains judged it little more than a plundering strike. But Jofar trusted neither the count nor the simplicity of the plan. The enemy had already shown cunning, and he would not wager lives upon the hope that the signs told the whole truth. Therefore, he prepared as though the worst lay behind the words, as though a far greater force might descend from Ashwood than any report foretold. Therefore Jofar did not wait until the orcs were upon it. Under cover of night he emptied Stonefell. No horn was blown, no fire of alarm was raised. Families were led away by ditch and field path, with lanterns hooded and wagon wheels wrapped in cloth. Children were carried sleeping against their mothers' shoulders. The old were lifted into carts. Those beasts that could be moved were driven quietly away, and those that could not were hidden as well as hasted allowed. Yet from afar Stonefell did not seem abandoned. Fires were left sleeping upon the hearths. Doors stood ajar. A cart lay broken in the lane, as though panic had passed through. In the yards and narrow ways Jofar set such snares as could be made swiftly by dwarven hands. Beams loosened above passages, pits covered with reed and earth, oil set where flame might leap, and ropes drawn low in shadow. As the sun went behind the iron peaks, the enemy arrived. First came the warg riders, lean and cruel, running low between the birches with their beasts, jaws open and steaming in the cold. Their mounts were great grey-black things, all sinew, scar, and yellow eye, and their screeches tore through the morning mist before the footmen were seen. Behind them sounded the drums, deep, hide drums beaten in a broken rhythm like the heart of some beast beneath the earth. Then came the raiders, shouting in harsh tongues, thinking to find fear and plunder. Their leader held back beneath the trees, watching the first rush with guards about him. He was no mindless brute, but one who wished to see where the dwarves would show themselves and how the settlement would break. But Stonefell did not break, for its people were already gone. The first orcs entered laughing, then the place rose against them. Beams crashed down in the lanes, fire sprang behind them, and dwarven shields appeared from behind walls and broken carts. The raiders found no helpless folk, but stone, smoke, and iron. The wargs screamed when flame leapt in the narrow ways, and some threw their riders among the pits and broken beams. The drums faltered. The first wild charge became confusion, and confusion became anger. Orcs hacked at empty doors, tore open storehouses, and found nothing but bait and shadow. Then horns answered from the edge of Ashwood, low and deep, and the raiders turned too late toward the trees. For Jofar had come upon the Watcher. Through the skirts of Ashwood, he had led a chosen company, moving unseen behind the orc captain while the raiders were drawn into the settlement. At his signal, the dwarves burst from the trees. Jofar went before them, and his axe was in his hand. The orc leader turned, and perhaps in that moment he understood that the town had not been the trap's heart. He had been. No long song was made of that combat. Jofar struck, and the captain of the raid fell beneath him. Yet Jofar did not chase honor into confusion. He called his dwarves back to the forest's edge, where roots and stones held the ground, and where the trees narrowed the wrath of the enemy. Leaderless, stung, and enraged, the orcs came in broken bands. Some fled from the burning lanes of Stonefell. Some rushed blindly from the smoke. Some came howling for the blood of the dwarf who had slain their chief. The warg riders tried to wheel around the flank, but there was no open field for them there. The birches stood close, the roots twisted beneath the leaves, and the dwarven shields were set like iron among the trees. Then the orcs came on. They came with fang and hook and axe, with the wargs snapping low at shields and legs, and the riders shrieking above them. The drums beat again, faster now, as though fury itself had taken up the mallets, but the number availed them little. They could not come all at once. The ground would not suffer it. They dashed themselves against the dwarven shields in pieces, and in pieces they were hewn down. A warg leapt at the line, and died with 3 spears in its throat. Another broke away, riderless and screaming, and vanished into the smoke of Stonefell. The raiders behind it stumbled upon the fallen, and Jofar's axe rose and fell where the line bent hardest. Thus Stonefell was saved, not by strength alone, nor by wild courage, but by craft, patience, and the stern ordering of men. For Jofar had not sought to match number with number. He had taken from the enemy the use of its number, and those who fought there remembered it long after, saying that on that day Stonegate first learned what manner of captain had been given to it. When the last raiders were slain or driven into the trees, the folk of Stonefell were still living beyond the reach of fire. Yet Jofar did not tarry among praise. His eyes went to the fallen orc captain, and to the tokens and rough orders taken from him. There he found darker counsel. Stonefell had not been the whole design. It had been meant to draw the eyes of Stonegate to the lower lands, while another stroke was prepared in the mountain ways against a remote mining town. The mark spoke of a host of 150 orcs. Then Jofar knew that the raid had been only the first motion of a larger hand. The news was brought before Dorin. The Lord listened and his face was troubled but not uncertain. The mining town lay far from the shelter of Stonegate's walls, yet it too was under his keeping. Jofar spoke of the roads, the approaches, the narrow cuttings through stone, and the old miners' paths by which the place might be defended. Doran weighed all, and Harn, who stood nearby, watched the young captain with narrowed eyes. "If the signs are true," said Harn, "then the foe comes in weight. Then we shall not meet him where weight may serve him." Jofar answered. So 60 dwarves went with Jofar into the mountain ways. Harn went also, and he did not wait to be commanded. "If you would hold 60 shields against 150 orcs," he said, "then old eyes may still have some worth beside young courage." Jofar accepted him, and no more was said between them, for in such an hour respect need not clothe itself in many words. Dorin also went forth with Jofar to the mining town. He wouldn't remain behind stone while folk under his protection stood in danger. With 30 guards, among them his own bodyguard, he rode beside the company and lent his hand to the first preparations, helping to see the townsfolk gathered, supplies ordered, and the early works of defense set in place. Yet his chief concern was not the walls nor the narrow roads, for that was the concern of the young captain. His purpose was the people. Once all was made ready, he intended to lead the families, the old and the young, safely back towards Stonegate, before the full strength of the North could descend upon the region. Therefore Dorin took charge of the evacuation himself, riding among the wagons and speaking with the townsfolk as they prepared to depart, so that none would doubt that their lord had not forgotten them. Jofar came to the mining town before the enemy. There the land favored one who understood stone. The paths were narrow, hemmed by rock and timber. Cart roads bent sharply beneath old-cut slopes. Sideways led between store huts, mine mouths, and walls of rough-hewn stone. He set his dwarves in the passages where few could come against them at once. He made a first line and a second, and behind them places of retreat if the first were forced. The sideways were watched, the old miners' exits guarded, and above the chief approach he placed small companies beside shelves of loose stone. Their command was to wait until the enemy was crowded beneath them. Thus Jofar set shields below and stone above, and when all was ready, it seemed that the mountain itself had been made a fortress. Before nightfall, Jofar sent scouts onto the high ridges, bidding them count not shadows, but heads, not rumors, but iron. They returned as the last light died behind the peaks, and their faces were grim. A host was climbing from the northward road, many shields, many torches, and wargriders ranging before them like wolves before a storm. Pack beasts came behind, and among the foremost ranks were orcs bearing hooks, axes, and long shields for the breaking of narrow ways. "Not less than 150, said the foremost scout. "And they come for the mines." Harn heard the report and looked down into the darkening road. "They have brought enough teeth for the bite," he said grimly. The scouts had done their work well. The enemy was near, and near in strength. The threat stood before them upon the mountain roads. If the mining town fell, the mountain road would be opened, and the folk under Doran's care would be hunted between stone and dark. After that there was a silence upon the mountain. It was not peace. It was the hush that comes before a door is broken, or before the first stone falls in an avalanche. The dwarves stood behind their shields in the narrow ways, breathing softly beneath their helms. Above them, those set among the loose stones waited with hands upon cold rock. Only the distant calls of birds and the whisper of the wind remained, and even those seemed hushed beneath the weight of what was coming. Then from the lower road there came a cry. It was an orc screech, harsh and high, answered at once by many throats below. The sound rose between the cliffs and struck the stone like a curse. Then came the drums, the trampling feet, the snarling of wargs, and the black press of the north climbing toward them. Jofar lifted his axe. No dwarf cheered. No dwarf broke rank. The terror of the north came on with fang and iron, and crashed upon the wall of dwarven shields. The first assault was fear beyond the telling of it. Orcs came with hooks and axes, seeking to drag shields aside and tear open the narrow way. Warg riders drove their beasts close to the stones, snarling and snapping at the line, while behind them the press of the host pushed forward in rage. Then Jofar gave the signal. From above, the mountain answered. Loose stones thundered down into the crowded path, breaking bodies and order alike. The foremost ranks reeled, and before they could gather themselves, the dwarven wall struck back. Shields held, spears thrust, axes rose and fell in the dim passage. Again the orcs came on, and again they were cast down. Their cries filled the road, and the clash of iron rang against the cliffs, so that the mountain seemed full of war. Yet the narrow ways betrayed them. Their number was great, but it could not come all at once. They spent their fury against a place too small for fury to master. There, Jofar walked behind the first line, keeping a fire from spreading. Where a shield bowed, he was there. Where young hands trembled, his voice steadied them. Where the stones above had fallen short, he sent a runner to the next shelf. Once a warg forced its head between two shields and dragged a dwarf half from the line. Jofar struck the beast behind the jaw and drove it back into the press below. The dwarf was pulled to his feet, and the wall closed again. Then, sooner than any had looked for, the assault broke away. The orcs drew back down the road, leaving the dead and wounded beneath the stones. Their drums ceased. Their cries faded. Smoke and dust drifted between the cliffs, and the silence returned. For a while the dwarves only waited. No one spoke of victory. Shields remained raised. The stone teams above the path kept their hands ready. Harn looked down the road, listening. Jofar stood at the first line, his axe lowered but not sheathed. They waited for the second wave. It did not come. The silence lengthened. Then Jofar's face changed. He looked upon the road, upon the bodies left too easily, upon the enemy withdrawing with more order than fear. They had been hurt, yes. Checked, yes. But not broken. No host of 150 orcs, hungry for the mines and still strong in number, would leave the first road merely because blood had been spilled. "This is no route," Jofar said. Harn turned to him. Far below the mountain, faint at first and then clearer, horns sounded from the lower road. Not one horn, many. After them came cries borne upward by the cold wind. In that hour the snare was shown. Only then did Jofar see the wound beneath the wound. The assault upon the mines had been no mere raid, but a carefully wrought distraction devised by the hidden will that moved in the north. Though no name had yet been spoken for that dark master, his purpose was plain enough. He had drawn Jofar to the mountain road, not to defeat him there, but to hold him fast while death struck elsewhere. While Jofar held the mountain against one host, another had fallen upon Dorin, and the folk upon the lower road. The enemy had not come to break Jofar's shield wall. It had come to make him raise it. Then Jofar knew that the dark had learned. He had used craft to save Stonefell, and now craft had returned against him. The North had taken his own manner of war and turned it upon the thing he most desired to protect. For a breath, no dwarf moved. Then Jofar's voice rang through the pass. "Down! To the lower road!" He left men enough to guard the mining town, and drove the rest down the mountain with all speed that iron-shod feet could bear. Harn went with him. They descended by broken paths and old miners' tracks, stumbling, sliding, leaping down where caution would have slowed lesser need. But time had gone before them, and the road below was already red. They came too late to save the column. The lower road was strewn with ruin. Carts lay overturned and broken. Packs were split open upon the stones. Guards of Stonegate lay where they had made their stands, their shields about them, their hands still closed upon haft or hilt. Among them lay the mining folk, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, old and young together, almost all slain. A few yet lived, hidden beneath wreckage or dragged behind stones by desperate hands, but the column itself had been broken beyond mending. At the road's heart, around a shattered wagon, the last of Doran's guards still stood about their lord. There were few of them, and each was wounded. The orcs who lingered turned when Jofar came. Then wrath took the dwarves. No horn was needed, no command was long spoken. Jofar went into them like a storm contained in mail, and his dwarves followed. The orcs left upon the field were slain or driven howling into the dark, while the larger force withdrew down the broken road, its cruel work accomplished. Jofar sought the mine behind the trap, but found no chieftain there, no lord of the north waiting beneath his axe. Whoever had shaped the snare had not remained to be taken in it. Then Jofar came to Dorin. The lord of Stonegate lay against the wheel of a ruined cart. His face were pale beneath dust and blood, and in his side below the ribs a short orc spear was lodged deep. One of his guards had cut the shaft, but none had dared draw the iron out, for all knew that if it came free upon the road, Dorin's life would pour after it. Yet his hand still held his sword, and about him lay the proof that he had not yielded while strength remained. Jofar knelt beside him. "My lord," he said. Dorin opened his eyes. For a moment he seemed to look beyond Jofar, as one who sees both the living and the dead standing together. Then he knew him. "The road," Dorin whispered. Jofar could not answer at once. His eyes moved over the fallen. One of the surviving guards, leaning upon a broken spear, spoke through bloodied lips. "He held it, Captain. He would not fall back, not while any yet ran." Jofar bowed his head. Then command returned to him, though grief was heavy upon it. The wounded were lifted, the few living were gathered and guarded. Dorin was born with the spear still in him, and the dead were covered where they could be. Before they left that place, Jofar saw beside the road a shield of Stonegate split through the boss, and blackened with blood and ash. Upon it was smeared a crooked mark in dark paint, like a wound made into a sign. None among them knew its meaning. Yet Jofar looked upon it, and it seemed to him that some will, far away in the north, had looked back. No songs greeted them when they returned. The gates of Stonegate opened, and silence met them. Those who had waited for news saw the wounded, the few survivors, the covered dead, Doran borne pale beneath the torchlight. No cry of victory rose then. The Lord was carried to the healers, and Jofar would have followed, but they barred the way. They needed water, knives, fire, quiet, and room in which to fight death, if death could be fought. Darak was allowed within, for he was old in the service of Stonegate, and old in friendship with Doran. Jofar remained outside with blood upon his mail and dust upon his face. For a moment he stood as one struck and not yet fallen. Then he turned from the door and went among the living. First he came to the wounded guards. He asked who had returned, who was missing, whose kin must be told before rumor found them. He ordered water to one chamber, blankets to another, and bearers to the lower hall. He sent men to double the eastern watch and close the lower road until dawn. He passed then among the survivors of the mining folk, and there grief struck him more deeply than battle had. A child sat silent with both hands closed about a torn piece of cloak. A miner asked for a name no one wished to answer. A wounded guard tried to rise when Jofar entered, but Jofar laid a hand upon his shoulder and bade him remain. Thus he walked from sorrow to sorrow, giving what orders could be given, for the living still had need, though the dead were beyond his reach. On the stair beneath the eastern wall he met Harn. The old captain's helm was under his arm, and his face was grim. "The watch is doubled," Harn said. "The lower gate is barred. I took the liberty." Jofar looked at him. "At the mining town," Harn said after a time, "your plan was sound. I saw it." "They held me there," said Jofar. "Aye," said Harn. "They held you. That is not the same as breaking you." But Jofar's heart was not yet ready to receive such words. Deep in the night a healer came for him. She found him in the lower hall beside a wounded guard whose brother had not returned. "Shield captain," she said softly, "Lord Doran asks for you." Jofar followed her through the inner ways of Stonegate. The chamber where Doreen lay was dim, lit by oil lamps and by the low red glow of a brazier. The spear had not been drawn. The healers had cut away his armor and bound him as best they could, but death was in the room, patient and near. Darak stood beside the bed, one hand resting upon the haft of his axe, and the lines of his face were deep with sorrow. Doran opened his eyes when Jofar entered. "Come nearer," he said. Jofar came and stood beside him. Long he was silent, for many words had gathered in him, and none seemed fit to pass his lips. "I held the mountain road," he said at last. "The stones fell where I had set them. The shields stood where I had placed them. The enemy drew back before us. All was as I had foreseen." Doran looked at him through the dimness. "Then why do you speak as one defeated?" "Because it was foreseen by another also," said Jofar. "They meant me to hold that road. They gave me victory there, while death went below." Darak stirred, but Doran lifted his hand a little, and the old captain remained silent. Jofar's voice grew harder. "I taught them deception." "No," said Doran, and though his voice was failing, iron yet remained in it. "You did not teach the dark to deceive. It had learned that craft in ages before you were born." Jofar bowed his head. "But you have taught it something," Doran continued. "You have taught it that Stonegate is no blind gate of stone. You have shown it a mind and a will. Therefore it will seek now not only to pass you, but to break you." "I should have seen farther." "Yes," said Dorin. "The word was not cruel, but it was heavy." "And you will," Dorin whispered. "But hear me, son of Jorik. The dead will call to you. They will call in dreams, and in the silence after battle. Hear them and remember. But do not follow them into the dark while the living still have need of you." Jofar's hands closed slowly at his sides. "They died because I was where the enemy wished me to be." "Some died," said Dorin, "because the enemy is cruel. Some lived because you held the mountain. Some few escaped because I held the road. Such is war. No captain gathers all lives into his hand and keeps them there untouched." Jofar looked at him then, and grief was naked in his face. "I only wanted to save them." "I know," said Dorin. "That is why you may yet become more than a captain." The words passed quietly, yet Darak lowered his gaze when he heard them. Jofar didn't answer. He did not reach for honor, nor did he understand it fully. But something of lordship, stern and sorrowful, came near him in that chamber. "Many dwarves can hold a shield," Dorin said. "Fewer can look upon the fallen and still think first of the living. Stonegate will have need of such dwarves." There was silence then, broken only by the low breathing of the dying lord and the faint crackle of the brazier. At last, Dorin turned his eyes toward Darak, and a gentler light came into them, as of old days remembered. "Go now, Jofar," said Dorin, and his voice had grown thin. "Leave me a little while with Darak. There are words between old friends that need no witness. Seek what rest you may. The morrow will ask much of you." Jofar bowed his head and withdrew, leaving them there, Dorin Greyshield, Lord of Stonegate, and Darak, his old captain, speaking softly together in the dimness, as men speak when many years lie behind them and few hours remain before them. Outside, the halls were hushed. No horn called from the wall, no song rose from the lower chambers. The lamps burned low, and the folk of Stonegate moved quietly beneath the mountain, as though loud speech might hasten the grief that all knew was coming. Jofar passed into the cold of the upper court and looked northward, where Ashwood lay black beneath the stars. The wind came down from the iron peaks and stirred the banners above him, but they gave no proud sound. They hung heavy in the night, like cloth over the faces of the dead. Long he stood there, and no rest came to him. For behind him the old lord was dying, before him the north was waking, and within him there had begun a burden that no shield could turn aside. So ended that day of victory and ruin. And though dawn would come over Stonegate, as dawn comes even over houses of mourning, few hearts in that fortress looked for comfort in its light. Chapter 4. The Bear Beneath the Mountain. Before dawn came over Stonegate, Lord Dorin Greyshield died. No horn was sounded then, for the healers had asked for silence, and none wished to send grief through the halls before the last breath had passed fully from him. Darak was with him at the end, as Dorin had desired. Of the words that passed between them little was ever told, for Darak kept them close, as old friends keep such things when death has made them sacred. It is said only that Dorin did not cry out, nor did he grasp after life as a miser after gold. He went quietly, as one who has stood long at a gate in storm and is at last relieved of watch. When word came to Jofar, he did not speak. He had not slept. The blood of the lower road was still dark upon parts of his mail, though the worst of it had been washed away, and his face was grey with weariness. He stood in the lower hall when the healer came, and there were wounded near him, and a boy of the mining folk asleep upon a bench beneath a borrowed cloak. Jofar heard the words, and for a while he looked toward the inner passages where Dorin had lain. Then he bowed his head. No tears came to him. They were buried too deep. He gave no order for mourning, for mourning had already entered every chamber. He gave no speech, for no speech would raise the dead. Instead, he went out from the lower hall, through the sleeping grief of Stonegate, and took a cloak from the wall near the eastern passage. None hindered him. The guards at the inner gate saw him pass and lowered their eyes. Whether from respect or sorrow, they themselves could not have said. He crossed the court beneath a sky not yet light, and went out by a postern that opened toward the lower path. Thus Jofar walked alone from Stonegate. The air was cold upon the mountain, and the last stars were fading above the iron peaks. Behind him the fortress lay dark and silent, its towers like black teeth against the paling east. Before him the land fell toward Ashwood, where the birches stood pale in the gloom, and the mists clung low among their roots. No birds sang, no horn called. Only the wind moved, and it came down from the snow lines with a thin voice, passing over stone and dead grass, and the road where many feet had lately run in dread. Jofar did not go towards the road of ruin. His feet turned rather by an older path, little used save by hunters and boys in summer, and it led him down through broken rocks to a small mountain lake that lay beneath a shoulder of the peaks. There Darak had once brought the recruits to harden them, and there Jofar had trained in youth with shield and axe until his hands bled and his breath burned in his chest. In those days he had thought weariness a heavy thing. Now he knew it was light beside grief. The lake was still when he came to it. The mountains were mirrored upon its surface, dark and solemn, and the first grey of morning lay upon the water like ash. Jofar stood at its edge, yet, and looked into it. He saw there no lord, no captain, no victor of Ashwood or Stonefell, but only a weary dwarf with dust in his beard and sorrow in his eyes. He thought of Jorik at the forge, smiling through blood and flame. He thought of Darak, lying beneath the arrow in Ashwood. He thought of Dorin against the broken wheel, spear in his side, asking first of the road and not of himself. He thought also of the mining folk, of carts overturned, of small hands cold in the dust. "The dead will call to you," Dorin had said. And they did. Their voices were not heard as voices are heard in halls. They came rather as weight, as memory, as the silence left behind when the crying has ended. They gathered around Jofar beside the lake, and he could not answer them, for he had no craft by which to mend what had been broken. He had held roads, struck down captains, broken ambushes, and turned cunning against cunning, yet death had still found a path between all his works. Long he stood there, and the day grew slowly. Then he heard a sound among the trees. At first his hand went to his axe, for the habit of war had entered him too deeply to sleep. But the sound was not the step of orc nor wog. From between the birches came two small shapes, dark and round, moving clumsily over root and stone. Bear cubs they were, newly grown enough to wander, but still foolish in their boldness. They came to the lake and put their paws upon the wet stones, snuffling at the water, and one fell half forward with a splash, then scrambled back in alarm. Jofar did not move. A moment later the mother came. She emerged from the trees in silence great and dark, her shoulders rolling beneath thick fur, her head low, her eyes fixed upon him. There was no rage in her at first, nor fear. She only stood between him and the cubs, and all the quiet strength of the wild seemed gathered in her body. She did not need to roar, she did not need to charge. The world itself appeared to understand the law written in her stance. These are mine, and I am before them. Jofar looked upon her, and something in him stilled. The bear watched him. He watched her. Between them lay the grey water of morning and the reflection of the mountains. Then one cub turned and pressed itself against her foreleg. The mother lowered her head, breathed once upon it, and with a slow motion turned back toward the trees. The cubs followed, stumbling and pushing one another, and the great shape passed again into the pale birches and was gone. At last he turned back towards Stonegate. By then the sun had risen above the eastern ridges, though its light was pale and without warmth. Smoke from the fortress chimneys rose straight into the cold air. As Jofar climbed the path, the walls of Stonegate came into view, old and grim upon the mountain's shoulder. They had been built to endure, and endure they had. Yet that morning they seemed less like a boast of strength than a burden set upon the land. Every stone had been bought by labour, every gate by vigilance, every year of peace by some grief that had gone before. The guards opened for him without question. Within, Stonegate had awakened to mourning. No hammer rang in the outer forges, no carts rattled in the market passages. The folk moved softly, and when they spoke low. Black cloth had been hung beneath the lamps in the upper hall. The banners of Stonegate, bearing the old sign of gate and mountain, had been lowered halfway from their rods, and their folds hung heavy in the still air. Guards stood at their posts with uncovered heads. Some bore bandages beneath their mail. Some stared before them, hollow-eyed, for they had seen the lower road and wished not to see it again in memory, though memory gave them no mercy. As Jofar passed from the gate toward the hall, folk saw him and fell silent. A wounded guard, leaning upon a spear, tried to straighten when Jofar came near. Jofar set a hand upon his shoulder and bade him sit. An old woman from Stonefell, whose sons had been brought safely within because of his night work there, touched her brow as he passed, but said nothing. A child of the mining folk stood beside a pillar, clutching a torn strip of cloak in both hands, and looked upon Jofar with eyes too old for his face. Guards lowered their heads. "Shield captain," one murmured. Another answered softer, "Jofar." The names followed him through the hall, not as praise, but as need. He came at last to the chamber of mourning. There Doran Greyshield lay upon a bier of dark stone, beneath the lamps and the lowered banners. His armour had been cleaned and set beside him, rent where the spear had gone in. His sword lay upon his breast, held in hands now bound in peace. A cloak of deep grey covered him from shoulder to foot, and upon it was set the small badge of Stonegate, a gate beneath the mountain. His face had been washed, and in death the lines of care had softened, so that he looked not young, but less weary than he had in life. Darak entered the hall and gestured for Jofar to follow. "Come, captain," he said, and his voice was low, but it carried. "The dead have their honour, The living have their own need. Jofar looked at him. He understood then that grief would not be allowed its full hour. Not yet. Stonegate stood between enemy and people, and Stonegate had no lord. They passed from the chamber into the council hall. The old captain had not changed his garments. He had remained as he had been through the night, with his axe at his side and grief upon his brow. Harn stood near also, grim and silent. Around them gathered captains, elders, healers, and those of rank in Stonegate. Among them was Gorin, called Stonehand, elder of the lower halls, a broad and thick-necked dwarf, whose beard was bound with plain iron rings, and whose eyes were dark beneath heavy brows. He had long served Dorin in matters of stores, law, winter measures, and the ordering of households. No captain loved him greatly, for he was slow to yield and slower to praise. Yet none called him false, for he had given his years to Stonegate, and knew the weight of hunger, debt, and cold better than many who spoke loudly of war. Jofar entered and stood beside Dorin's bier. The hall was not great by the measure of the high kingdoms, but it was old and stern. Its pillars were cut with the names of those who had held the eastern marches before Dorin's day, and above the hearth was carved the first gate of Stonegate, shut against the dark. There the captains and elders gathered. Darak stood at the head, though no seat was taken. Harn stood to one side, his helm beneath his arm. Gorin stood opposite, with several elders near him. Jofar stood below the Lord's chair, and did not look at it. The chair itself was plain, high-backed, and made of black stone and old oak, with arms worn smooth by many hands. Dorin had sat there in council, not in splendor. Now it stood empty. For a time no dwarf wished to be the first to break silence. Then Gorin Stonehand spoke. "Stonegate cannot remain headless," he said. "That all here know. But neither should grief make haste where wisdom should walk slowly." Darek's eyes turned to him. "Speak plainly, Gorin." "I shall," said Gorin. "There are some among you who would set Jofar son of Jorik in Dorin's place before the Lord is yet cold beneath stone." A murmur moved through the hall, but Jofar did not move. Gorin looked at him, and there was no hatred in his face. That made his words heavier. "What has he done for us?" Gorin said. "Won battles, aye, I will not rob him of that. He stood in Ashwood. He broke the raiders at Stonefell. He held the mining road against greater number. He's brave and cunning in the field. Let no dwarf say I deny it." He turned then to the gathered elders. "But rule is not battle. Shall we set the lordship of Stonegate upon every young hand that swings an axe well? A lord must weigh bread before steel, winter before glory, law before wrath. He must reckon stores, settle kin strife, hold tribute, speak with the high halls, and keep peace among folk who have no mind for war until war is at their threshold. Jofar is young. Too young, I say, to know such weight. A shield captain may save a road and still ruin a fortress." Some lowered their eyes. Others looked toward Darak. Harn's face remained like stone. Gorin's voice hardened. "And I will say more. His victories have not come without graves. The North has learned us. It has answered cunning with cunning, and Lord Dorin lies dead upon a bier. I do not blame Jofar for the malice of orcs, but neither will I close my eyes and call youth wisdom because grief desires a strong hand." There was silence then. All eyes turned at last toward Jofar. He might have answered. He might have spoken of Stonefell emptied before the raid, of the mining road held, of the wounded he had carried, and the dead he had covered. He might have said that Doran himself had looked upon him and spoken of more than captaincy. But he said nothing. He stood below the empty chair with his hands at his sides and let the judgment of others pass over him. Darach looked at him, and something like sorrow and pride mingled in the old captain's face. Then Darach spoke. "You ask what he has done for us, Gorin," he said. "I will answer, though he will not. He has stood where others broke. He has thought before striking. He has struck only when striking might shield the living. At Stonefell he did not seek glory in the street. He emptied the town before fire came to it. At the mining road he did not chase honor down the pass. He set shields where few could hold against many, and the enemy paid blood for every step." Gorin opened his mouth, but Darach raised a hand. "You speak as though the dark was sleeping until Jofar woke it. It was not. It had marked our roads, counted our watches, and set its teeth toward our folk before ever he struck in Ashwood. If he has changed this war, then he has changed it in this. Stonegate is no longer blind before the blow falls." The hall was still. Darach's voice deepened. "You say rule is not battle. True. But what is rule, if not the bearing of others before oneself? I have watched this dwarf since he was a boy, standing over his father's body with an axe in his hand and fear behind him, yet he did not run. I watched him grow into a smith who mended guard mail without being asked, who went to the houses of the fallen where other young folk sought ale and ease, who took apprentices so that the forge would not fail when duty called him elsewhere. I watched him become a captain who, when the wounded returned, asked not who praised him, but who still breathed, and who must be told before rumor reached their kin." Darach turned then to Gorin. "You ask whether he knows the weight of rule. I say he has carried weight since his 17th year. Not the weight of a chair, perhaps. Not the weight of ledgers and seals, but the weight beneath them all. The lives of those who look to stone and shield and ask not for greatness, but only to be kept from the dark." Harn then stirred. Many looked toward him, for Harn had not been quick to honor Jofar in earlier days. "I opposed him once," said Harn. "I was not wrong to test him. Stonegate cannot be handed to courage alone. But I saw him at the mining road. His plan was sound. The enemy didn't break him. It spent cunning to hold him away from the true blow. That is what the North thinks of him. We would be fools to think less." Gorin's brow lowered, but he did not answer. Harn went on. "If age alone made lords, then no old hall would ever fall. If custom alone guarded gates, then the dead would be few. I do not say Jofar has all wisdom. No dwarf does on the day he first bears rule. But I say this. He listens before he commands, and when command comes, men stand straighter for hearing it. That is no small thing." A murmur passed through the captains. Some nodded. Some still looked troubled, but the trouble was changing shape. Darach set his axe butt upon the stone floor. "Then let Stonegate speak by old right," he said. The words struck the hall with the weight of law. No lord had named heir. No blood son of Dorin stood to claim the chair. In such an hour, by the old customs of frontier holds, the captains and elders of Stonegate might speak the name of one to bear the lordship until death, or rightful challenge took it from him. Darak turned first to Harn. Harn Greyhelm, captain of the eastern wall, speak. Harn lifted his head. Jofar, son of Jorik, he said. Darak turned to another. Bram of the lower gate, speak. Jofar, son of Jorik. Tolek, master of roads. Jofar, son of Jorik. Elda, keeper of stores. There was a pause, for she had stood near Gorin. Yet she looked at Jofar, and perhaps she remembered water sent to the wounded before the Lord's chamber had called him. Jofar, son of Jorik, she said. So the name passed through the hall from captain to elder, from elder to master, each speaking as stone is laid upon stone. Some voices were strong, some quiet, some reluctant, but none after Harn spoke another name. At last Darak turned to Gorin Stonehand. Gorin, elder of the lower halls, speak. Gorin stood very still. His eyes went to the empty chair, then to the door beyond which Dorin lay, then to Jofar. Long he said nothing. But he was no traitor to Stonegate, and he knew when the will of the hall had gathered beyond breaking. He bowed his head. Jofar, son of Jorik, he said. Then Darak himself turned and faced the hall. Jofar, son of Jorik, he said, by old right and by the need of Stonegate. The words ended, and silence followed. No cheer rose, no song was made. It was not a triumph, it was a burden being placed. Only then did Darak turn to Jofar. The hall has spoken, he said. The burden has fallen. Jofar looked upon those gathered there. He did not smile. He did not glance toward the Lord's chair as a hungry man toward food. His eyes moved from Darak to Harn, from Gorin to the captains, and beyond them, as though he saw through stone to the wounded below. The frightened families, the barred gates, the roads under shadow. Then he spoke. Then let no more time be spent upon my worth. The dead must be honored, and the living must be brought within stone. Something changed in the hall. It was not joy. It was steadiness. Men who had waited for a speech received instead a command and found it better. Darak went then to a chest set beneath the wall, old and iron-bound. From it he took the key of Stonegate. It was large, black with age, and wrought in the old fashion, its bow shaped like the arch of the eastern gate. Many lords had held it, though no lord had owned it. It belonged to Stonegate, and only passed from hand to hand as watch passes from one guard to another. Darak came before Jofar and placed it in his palm. The key is for the gate, he said. The iron was cold and heavy. Then Harn stepped forward. 2 guards came behind him bearing the Lord's shield. It had not been made for show. It was broader than the shields of the guard, old blackened ironwood bound in steel, with a rim scarred by many blows. Upon its face was set the old sign of Stonegate, a gate beneath mountain stone. Time had darkened it, and there were cuts upon it that no polishing had erased. It was a shield a strong dwarf might bear, but not lightly, and not for long without knowing its weight. Harn took it from the guards himself. For a moment he held it before Jofar, and the hall saw old doubt and new loyalty meet in his face. The shield is for the folk, Harn said. Then he gave it to him. Jofar took the Lord's shield upon his arm, and its weight settled through him. It was heavier than he had thought. That pleased him grimly. A lord's charge should not feel light. At that moment, the great doors of the council hall opened. A messenger stood there, travel-stained and cold from the road, with the mark of the great halls upon his cloak. Behind him, 2 guards of Stonegate looked uneasy, for they had tried to halt him and failed, only because he bore a sealed answer to Doran Greyshield. The messenger entered, then stopped. His eyes moved over the hall, the lowered banners, the gathered captains, the black cloth, the empty chair, the iron key in Jofar's hand, the Lord's shield upon his arm. "I bear answer," he said, though his voice faltered, "to Lord Doran Greyshield of Stonegate." No one spoke. Then Darak looked to Jofar. Harn also turned. One by one the hall followed, until the messenger too understood where the answer must now be given. Jofar looked at him calmly. "What does the great hall command?" he asked. "What answer has it sent?" The messenger swallowed. He broke the seal and read, though before he had reached the middle, his face had grown pale. "The High Lords have heard the warning of Stonegate," he said. "Yet they deem the matter for now to be a border raid of orcs and mountain beasts, such as the frontier has endured in former years. No host shall be mustered at this time. The keeping of the eastern marches remains the charge of the Lord of Stonegate." The words died in the hall. For a breath there was nothing. Then anger moved, low and dangerous. A captain cursed beneath his breath. One elder struck his staff upon the floor. Harn's jaw tightened. Gorin closed his eyes, and whatever doubt he still held was darkened by shame. For even he knew the answer had come too late and too cold. Doran had asked for aid. Aid had not come. The messenger lowered the parchment. "My lord," he said, and now the words were to Jofar, though he had not meant them so when he entered. "I did not know." "No," said Jofar, "you did not." He took the parchment and looked at the seal of the great halls. For a moment, those near him thought he would tear it, but he did not. He folded it once and handed it to Darak. Then he looked to the old banner of Stonegate hanging above the hearth. "Long has Stonegate borne the sign of wall and gate," said Jofar, "and that sign shall not be cast down, for our fathers held these stones before us, and by them our people have endured. But stone alone cannot guard the field, nor the road, nor the child beyond the gate." He turned then to the captains and elders, and his voice grew harder. "If the high halls deem this only a border matter, then by border hands it shall be answered. Let new banners be made for the halls and for the march. A bear upon a dark field, edged in ash grey. For the bear does not seek war in the forest, yet all things know terror when its own are threatened." The hall had gone utterly still. "So shall Stonegate be," said Jofar. "We shall not abandon the gate, but neither shall we hide behind it while evil hunts our folk. If the North comes for our own, then let the North learn this. We shall meet it wherever it may be found. No corner of this land shall be safe from us while I yet remain." No dwarf cheered then, but many drew breath as men do when a door has opened before them and cold air has entered from a wider world. Jofar looked to Harn. "What are your orders, my lord?" Harn asked. There was no hesitation in him now. Jofar answered at once. "Bring every outer family within reach of the walls before nightfall. Send carts, guards, and spare cloaks. No child sleeps beyond stone if our feet can reach them. Double the scouts beyond Ashwood, but none shall ride alone. Close the lower road until it is searched from ridge to ditch. Mark the places where smoke is seen. Count tracks, count fires, count silence also, for silence has become a weapon of the north. He turned to Gorin. Open the winter stores. Gorin looked up sharply, but Jofar went on. Not freely and not foolishly. But no family brought in under my order shall hunger in the halls. Set measures. Take names. Keep account. If we survive, we shall reckon debt later. If we do not, full ledgers will warm no dead hands. For the first time, something like grim approval moved across Gorin's face. It shall be done, he said. Tolek, said Jofar, send the riders after the messenger when his horse is arrested. They will bear our own answer to the great halls. Dorin Greyshield is dead. Stonegate has not fallen. A new lord holds the eastern marches, and the mark found upon the broken shield shall be copied and sent under seal. Let the high lords look upon what they have named a border raid. The messenger bowed his head. I will carry word of Lord Dorin's fate, he said. And of you. Jofar looked at him. Carry truth, he said. That will be enough. The messenger left before Dorin was buried. He rode from Stonegate under a sky of pale light, bearing tidings heavier than those he had brought. That Dorin Greyshield had died upon the road, that Stonegate had raised Jofar in his place, and that the eastern marches stood alone. After his departure, the work of the day began. Orders ran through Stonegate like fire through dry wood, yet not with panic. Gates opened and shut. Riders went out in pairs and threes. Carts were brought from the lower yards. Wounded men who could still sit a saddle begged to ride, and most were refused. Women of the halls gathered blankets, bread, dried meat, and clean linen. The armourers counted helms and mended straps. The watch changed upon the eastern wall, and no eye looked north carelessly. Yet before evening came, Dorin was laid to rest. The memorial hall of Stonegate lay deep within the mountain, cut into a chamber where the stone was dark and veined with silver. There were set the names of those who had borne rule, and of those whose deaths had shaped the fortress more deeply than any decree. The people gathered in silence as Dorin was carried there. Before him went Darak, bearing no helm. Behind him came Harn, Gorin, the captains, and Jofar with the iron key at his belt. No crown was set upon him. No gold glittered at his brow. He looked less like a king than a guard given too much to carry, and for that reason many trusted him more. Dorin was laid beside Hilda, his wife, and Frida, his mother, beneath the carved sign of the tree that had marked their stones, since the days when elderwood burned and became ashwood. Jofar saw then, more clearly than before, the wound that had dwelt at the root of Dorin's caution. The old lord had not feared war because his heart was small. He had feared it because he knew its price by name. Darak stood before the 3 stones. For a long while he could not speak. Then he said, Dorin Greyshield held his gate. That was all at first, but the words went through the hall, and many bowed their heads. Darak drew breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. He held it in youth and in age. He held it when grief took wife and mother. He held it when men called for haste, and when others called for ease. He did not love war, yet he did not flee it. He did not seek honor, yet honor found him on the lower road. There he stood while any yet ran. There he fell with sword in hand. Let him rest now beside those for whom he kept Stonegate all his life. Harren stepped forward then, and many were surprised, for he was not a dwarf of tender speech. He was cautious, Harren said. Many of us cursed him for it. More than once I did. But caution is not cowardice. He spent it as another might spend gold, buying days of peace where he could. If war has come at last, let no fool say Dorin invited it by weakness. The dark came because it is dark. Dorin stood because he was lord. Then Harren bowed to the stone. No more was said. None was needed. Dorin Greyshield was sealed among his own. When the rites were ended, Jofar did not return at once to the council hall. Instead, he went down by older passages, through ways that smelled of coal, leather, iron, and smoke. He came to the forge that had been his father's, and after Jorik's death had been his. For a moment he stood outside it, listening. The sound within was not the full clamour of labour. No great work had yet begun, but there was motion. Cloth being measured, metal pieces laid out, charcoal stirred, tools gathered from hooks. The forge fire burned low and red, casting long shadows over the walls. Jofar entered. His former apprentices were there. Brel, broad-handed and quiet, who had once spoiled 3 hinge pins in a morning and wept from shame. Nari, quick-eyed and sharp-tongued, who had learned leatherwork faster than any expected, and little Oren, no longer little, who had taken to carving patterns in shield rims when he thought no one watched. Others stood with them, smiths, weavers, a dyer from the lower halls, and an old woman who had stitched banners before Jofar was born. They all turned when he entered. For a strange breath, the years folded. Jofar saw himself younger, black with soot, working beneath Jorik's eye. He saw his father's hands, guiding his own over hot iron. He saw the axe upon the bench, broken and restored. He saw the door burst open in memory and flame beyond it, and an orc in the forge, and his father falling. Here much had begun. Now something else would begin here also. On the work table lay dark a cloth, not yet cut. Beside it were strips of ash-grey thread and pieces of black-dyed leather. Upon a board, someone had sketched uncertainly the shape of a bear standing with lowered head and heavy shoulders. Nari spoke first, because she had always been boldest. "My lord," she said, and stumbled a little over the title. Jofar set his hand upon the old anvil. It was scarred by years of hammering, and near one edge there remained a mark where Jorik had once struck too hard and cursed softly, because Jofar had laughed at him. Jofar's fingers rested there for a moment. "Let the banner be made well," he said, "but let it not yet be raised." Brel frowned. "Not raised, my lord." "No," said Jofar. "Not for mourning eyes, not for our own pride. The first who behold it above Stonegate shall be those who come to test these walls." The forge grew quiet. Then Oren smiled grimly. "Then we had better make it strong enough to frighten orcs." Jofar looked at him, and for the first time that day, something almost like warmth touched his face. He smiled and left them, then to their work. The day had grown brighter when Jofar climbed at last to the eastern wall. Below him the road wound down toward Ashwood and the lower lands, where carts were already moving under guard, gathering those who had lived too long beyond the gate's reach. Farther out, the birches stood pale and restless in the wind. Beyond them rose the dark backs of the iron peaks, and between the trees lay places where old grief and new danger mingled. He had stood on walls before as captain. Now the stones beneath his feet seemed to know him differently. Deep below, in the forge where his father had died, and where his own road had begun, hands set to dark cloth and ash-grey thread. The bear was being made beneath the mountain, unseen by foe. Before him, far within the forest, a thread of smoke rose among the trees. It was thin at first, no more than a line against the daylight. Then another lifted beyond it, and another farther north, faint and crooked in the pale sky. No alarm was sounded, no cry passed his lips. Jofar only watched. The north was not idle. Behind him Stonegate mourned, beneath him Stonegate laboured, before him the shadow moved in Ashwood. So began the lordship of Jofar, who took no crown upon his brow, but bore the key of the gate and the shield of his people. And though the banner of the bear had not yet risen upon the walls, its making had begun in fire and silence. And there were some who would later say that from that day onward, Stonegate ceased merely to endure the dark, and began to answer it